The question of psychic phenomenon, or the Psi Phenomenon as I will refer to it here, deals with a whole host of experiences we humans have difficulty classifying. A large part of that comes from an education system we spend 13 years of our lives in that never really addresses the question of consciousness or the fundamental nature of experience. Author Peter Levenda left some clues about consciousness in the research journal that was available for purchase when Gods was first released, the first of the three-part series Gods, Man, and War. One early entry in the journal says this, quote, "The experience of the UFO is at once mystical and mechanical. It juxtaposes two categories in ways that are startling and unnerving. It tries to occupy space in both halves of brains simultaneously. And isn't that as good as any description of full consciousness? The mystical and the mechanical is to say that seeing a UFO is both a spiritual experience and a material experience." In Man, Tom DeLonge and Peter Levenda go further into detail defining two essential paradigms of our reality and the phenomenon. The first essential paradigm being the influence of what we will call DNA consciousness in the world. DNA consciousness does not ponder the meaning of life or explore the profundities of the universe. It ponders primarily reproduction and the dominance and ongoing success of its own DNA lineage over all others. When we look back at the last World War from a DNA consciousness perspective and peel back the economic and religion excuses, we find German DNA eradicating Jewish DNA. As Peter Levenda puts it, what else is genocide other than the elimination of one DNA group by another DNA group? Once we understand the driver behind the behavior, then we can begin to understand why the German DNA consciousness at the time, and indeed large portions of society even today, have seen homosexuality as a threat. If DNA consciousness has the goal of passing on its genes and ensuring the in-network success of like genes, then homosexuals become a threat to the gene pool because, until very recently, they did not reproduce. DNA consciousness uses governments, religion, and borders as a tactic to ensure in-network DNA preferential treatment and success. Let's consider gay marriage. Was it not first religion and then government that forbade these relationships from formal recognition? For countless generations, the government and religion only recognized relationships that could breed and outright prohibited the crossing of the genetic lines. This genetic sense of superiority is at the heart of slavery. You own another man or woman because you think that you are superior to them in the same way you are superior to a horse or a dog. And then these slave owners enforce that slavery with violence. That violence, by the way, was legal and defended by government and religion. This thesis is a devastating proposition for what DNA consciousness represents in the human experience and the tools it uses. The second essential paradigm is not coming to terms with some magical or mystical reality or truth, but rather to acknowledge the nature of our creative, loving, and non-local human consciousness. Our consciousness is not created in our brains. Our brain is a transceiver, receiving and sending communication back and forth to our consciousness. My friend Joe likes to refer to our bodies as walking and talking meat sacks. One interesting piece of evidence that we are inhabiting a meat sack, or an avatar if you wish, comes from a study done of individuals with multiple personality disorder by Dr. Bennett Braun at Rush Presbyterian St. Luke's in the mid to late 80s. In his study, a patient with this dissociative disorder would manifest one personality, or what I would call consciousness, that would be violently allergic to smoke, and yet another personality would later manifest in the same avatar or body and could be in a smoky room without any negative effect. And this phenomenon continued across not only other patients, but included, according to the New York Times, quote, the abrupt appearance and disappearance of rashes, welts, scars, and other tissue wounds, switches in handwriting and handedness, Epilepsy, allergies, and color blindness that strike only when a given personality is in control of the body. Two incredible implications come to mind. First, it seems not only possible, but likely that the individuals with multiple personalities are actually sharing the neural connection with other consciousness. And two, allergies are consciousness, not physically based illnesses. Drugs are not going to cure allergies, nor, I suspect, is the cure as difficult as we believe. In Dr. Braun's research on the patient with a smoke allergy, he identifies the experience of a father who not only abused her, but smoked as the trigger for the allergy. The smoke triggered a memory of her father, and it caused a severe allergic reaction, quite physical one at that. Memory, or redefining what memory is, will lead us to breakthroughs in our understanding of consciousness and how it acts non-locally. What is memory? And why is smell so important to explaining and understanding Alzheimer's? A few years ago, I taught myself how to make bread. The smell of fresh baked bread is honestly one of my favorite. And if you stop and you focus for just a moment yourself, you can smell fresh baked bread. Smell is unique because it is the only sense that goes through its own organ in the brain to be interpreted. And because of that separate point of entry in our brain, smell has the strongest effect on what is known as memory. Individuals with Alzheimer's often present as an early symptom the loss of smell. Smell is in many ways like your brain's card catalog of locations in time and space. When you recall the smell of fresh baked bread, you are not remembering the smell of fresh baked bread. You are actually experiencing the smell of fresh baked bread. A smell, by the way, that also connects your consciousness to a moment in space and time when the bread was baked. If you can smell the bread, you can reach out and connect with it in space and time. And for some, when you can no longer connect with the smell in space and time, we call it dementia. If you've ever wondered what remote viewing is like, it's like recalling the smell of fresh baked bread and then using that smell connection to recall and connect with many other elements of the experience. The smell becomes your target, just like remote viewers are given targets. And your ability to access that information depends on your focus. There is an interesting tangent to memory, the Mandela effect, the phenomenon of remembering an experience differently than current reality. The Mandela effect is interesting because the implication is that our experience cannot be changed, a primary rule of free will, but that something in the physical world can be changed for someone else's experience. James Earl Jones himself says that he remembers the line as Luke, "I am your father." But that's not what's in the movie, nor is it what's in the script.
When I first saw the dialogue that said, "Luke, I am your father," I said to myself, he's lying. I wonder how they're going to play that lie out.
For millions of fans and James Earl Jones, the experience is Luke, "I am your father." But for someone out there, somehow and for some reason, it was altered in the human experience to, "No, I am your father." I have suggested in the past that we are the playthings of the gods, a sentiment echoed by the Greeks, indicating again that the influence is occurring over millennia. It may be reasonable to consider that our experiences, in many ways, are being and have been crafted over long periods of time by beings, or more precisely, highly elevated conscious energies, who themselves are not experiencing time or space, but have the perspective of a panopticon, the ability to see across the space and time of our human experience and nurture directions and events. This was covered in my video Disclosure 6, the Kurt Russell Effect, and you can either find the link down below or it'll be one of the end screen credits. I suspect that this elevated conscious energy is the dominant work of Hal Puthoff's paper on ultra-terrestrials. Dr. Puthoff responded to a question about the unpublished paper, saying, quote, "I've got my colleagues who say, oh my God, the aliens are here. I have Jacques Vallée telling me, no, these are interdimensional, whatever, whatever." To summarize the whole answer of Dr. Puthoff, he lays out that there are physical beings that are visiting our planet and that have been since great antiquity. However, there are energies working here we might call ultra-terrestrials. And as a scientist, he had a look at the subject and wrote up a paper. Gods not only has this as a founding part of their thesis, but it is also part of a broader question of the experience we human beings here on Earth are having. It would appear then that the abduction phenomenon is about a DNA consciousness. Small gray beings take people in the middle of the night without permission and then treat the abductee in the same way we treat wolves we've tagged in the forest to manage the population. It appears that these beings stop the neuron alignment that would create a waking connection during the abduction, which also has the effect of inducing paralysis, the inability to move. What these small gray abductors can't do is keep the abductee from experiencing the abduction, an artifact of free will, nor from recalling it if they truly choose, such as with hypnosis, another feature of free will. If we look at the hypnosis process itself, we see that what it's helping abductees do is another example of remote viewing a moment in space and time and gathering additional details. The evidence is laid out in both gods and man, indicates that in great antiquity, a DNA failing consciousness from another world seeded the DNA molecule on planet Earth, from which all life today comes. This act was termed directed panspermia. This was the thesis of the co-discoverer of the DNA molecule, Francis Crick, and highlighted in Part 2, Man. Book 3, which will be called War, it is my suspicion, will expose the effort by DNA consciousness to ensure that human consciousness does not wake up to the reality, as Teilhard de Chardin puts it, that we are not human beings having a spiritual experience, but rather that we are spiritual beings having a human experience. We are not our DNA. We are conscious beings able to do one thing that's very important that DNA consciousness cannot do, which is love. Once we understand and accept our conscious nature, whatever it fully is, we can start to use the tools that come with it, like openness and curiosity. This openness and curiosity led me to the Thunderbird story and an incredibly brave warrior named Bluefeather. In that openness, as I read the story, images continued to flash in my mind, including for the briefest of moments, the mighty Thunderbird itself. As I read the story, I had a profound sense of knowing the story was true. Openness leads one's curiosity to knowledge, and that knowledge leads to wisdom and understanding. The purpose of meditation is to train your brain to quiet itself and open the channel. In that liminal space, information is available to you, and that information is a type of gnosis, or knowledge, or spiritual understanding. Viewing the event as I did was very much a spiritual type of connection, or knowing of the event. My intent to learn and my openness to know were fundamental to the connecting of the experience. Primary challenge with our planet today can be summed up by the last quote from Peter Levenda's research journal, quote, "Reality is royal, i.e., whatever the king decides." King, as I learned from the History of English podcast, is cognate with kin. Kin refers to a DNA designation, family, and those with which I share a DNA connection. Kings and queens ruling over portions of our planet is an indication that DNA consciousness is in charge. It is their distinct DNA lineage that gives them legitimacy, and generally speaking, not much else. I highly recommend you watch Robert Sepper's video, Bloodline of the Serpent Seed. to explore the deep roots of the DNA rulers. His work is well worth your time. A popular argument might be that we don't experience that here in America because we elect people. The majority white, rich male of the U.S. Congress expresses clearly our DNA preference. All of these facts are an acknowledgement that we value DNA consciousness as a precursor of our elected officials over their content. How do I know? Our 2020 presidential candidates are both old, rich, white men. We are currently in the phase of our country where we hope one of them has the genes of longevity, that they have accrued the wisdom to save us from this mess. Martin Luther King innately understood this dynamic of DNA and human consciousness when he said that we should value someone not by the color of their skin or DNA, but by the content of their character, or I would argue their content to connection of consciousness. Inside where it counts, we are all a unique and special consciousness, a light with a deep sense of love. Human consciousness is at its best when it is free to be creative with that light and that love. We won't find the solution to any of our problems by looking outward at an authority figure. We will find our solutions by looking inside and asking what we can do to help, and then follow our hearts. Our heart is wrapped in the chains of authority structures, and if you wish to break the chains, you will need to break the rules along the way. It's like leveling up, only you end up with more friends, better relationships, and a healthy planet. Like, share, subscribe. Please leave me a comment down below.